Hot take. Using Shadcn Radix is a liability at this point. Either WorkOS needs to find more people to maintain it, or the ecosystem should unite around AriaKit. Oh boy, what a big drama. As you guys can guess, I have a ton of thoughts and sources on this. There's a lot to go into here. Shadcn is a phenomenal set of components that I've been recommending for a long time. I still love them. I still think you should use them. But there is a real concern here that Chris brings up. And Chris here, CJE, is a trusted friend, contributor, collaborator, deep in all of the things that I talk about and touch here. He's one of the most important contributors to Create T3 app and has just generally been a really good friend and person to have in the space. So for him to come out and say something this bold is important and definitely needs us to talk about it. We're not just going to cover what he said. We're also going to cover the other proposals people made, other libraries that they recommend, and most importantly, Shadcn himself's response to all of this. There's a ton to dig into here. I can't wait to do it, but someone has to pay the bills, and it probably shouldn't be WorkOS today. So a quick word from today's sponsor, and then we'll dive in. I still remember when I got started with web dev, it was really hard to make good UIs because CSS was super difficult. Since then, Tailwind happened, and now CSS isn't hard, but finding the right inspiration is. Now we have these AIs that you can hand a screenshot and they'll perfectly recreate it with Tailwind. But where do you get the right screenshot? Where do you find the right inspiration? Finding the right starting point is often the hardest part of making a great user experience. And that's why today's sponsor has come in clutch for me. Mobin is where I go when I need inspiration for making something look good, because they have this insane collection with over 400,000 screens from real applications that you probably use yourself. So if you're trying to make something like, I don't know, a sign up page for iOS, now we have all these different options. You can break it down by category. So let's see how crypto companies handle their sign-up pages, or compare that with how developer tools do it instead. Here we can see how Linear handles sign-up on iOS. They do it through a web view, which is kind of funny. But if we switch to web, we can see many more different options for different developer tools. If you like one, you can just click Command-C. Now the image is in your clipboard. Hop over to your AI tool of choice, be it your IDE like Cursor or something like V0, paste it in, say, make it look like this, but make these changes, and it will just generate the thing you're looking for. Make a sign up page that looks like this for my service named T3 Chat. Use purple as the main accent color. Make it dark mode 2. And now Bolt is just generating a UI based on the screenshot that I found. And look at that. With no effort at all, we now have a beautiful sign-up page for our application. I've been using this a ton since I got started with it, and I think you will as well. For $10 a month, it's a steal. Check them out today at soydev.link/Mobin. I think it's important that we understand what both Shadcn UI is as well as Radix before we go any further. I've covered Shadcn a bunch. I've covered Radix a bit. I have my famous diagram of the types of UI libraries, and the reason I like Shadcn is part of all of that. This is the diagram that I've drawn in the past. I try to break up style libraries into these three pieces. There's CSS++, which is better ways to write the CSS part, the styles directly. Something like Tailwind is a good example of that. Headless behaviors are things like how the dropdown behaves, how focus is managed, how things work between the JavaScript, the styles, and the page, but mostly the JavaScript and focus management side. And Radix is a great example of that. And then styles themselves, like the thing that makes it look the way it looks, like the actual CSS directly, not the syntax for it, but the CSS itself, especially opinionated things like Bootstrap or Material UI, those are how it's supposed to look. The classic headless, boneless, and skinless UI that I've covered in the past. One of my favorite videos I've done. The thing I touch on a lot because it's an important concept to understand is the relationship between these things. And I put Shadcn in the middle because it's a unique thing where it comes with Tailwind for the styling and CSS side. It comes with Radix for how the behaviors work. And it has the styles, which they wrote themselves, for how it looks, so it looks the way it does. Traditionally, I haven't liked things that combine all the parts because now you've given up ownership of them. But the thing that makes Shadcn different as a component library is it gives you the source code. When you run the Shadcn commands, it doesn't add the package to your code base. It adds the code to your code base. That code happens to rely on packages sometimes, like it relies on Tailwind in order to add the CSS. It relies on Radix for a lot of the different behaviors. It also relies on things like Sonar for their toasts and other libraries like that. But Radix is without question one of the most key pieces to the Shadcn ecosystem. So Radix has since been split. When the Radix team was trying to make more money and also give you more styles, they created Radix UI, which is Radix themes, so that you can have things that look a certain way that they had built and designed for you, but Radix is mostly known for Radix primitives. These are the pieces like the dialog, the drop-down menu, popovers, things like that. And if we go to the docs for these, you'll see that they are relatively minimal. We get the code for the accordion root, item, yada yada. We have these components and also hooks that they provide, but they don't make it look any way. You have to bring the styles yourself. As we see here, this is example styles they wrote to show it off. That includes everything you need for it to look a certain way, animate properly, all of that. But the behaviors is what they do. The fact that the accordion can have things open and close and that it works with like keyboard navigation, enter key does what it's supposed to, all of those details are what Radix brings for you. Radix is a really good library for doing a lot of these things. It's gotten a lot of love over the years. Radix was originally built at the startup Modules that has since went defunct. It was also built alongside some other cool things like Stitches, which was a really useful library early on for managing like CSS and JS stuff. The Radix team continued to maintain the Radix open source project, eventually putting out themes as an attempt to make more money and offer more in the Radix ecosystem. And then WorkOS acquired the team. WorkOS acquiring the Radix team and project actually made a lot of sense in my opinion. Obviously, I account for bias because WorkOS is one of our sponsors, but I was chatting with them way before they were ever even considering sponsoring the channel about this because we wanted to make sure this was a good alignment and that this made sense, and I thought it did. WorkOS needed much better component libraries and integrations for bringing auth into your React applications, and these guys were some of the industry leaders in doing that well. There's a reason WorkOS is as popular as they are and is used by half the companies we talk about nowadays. They're a really good auth platform. Radix was brought on to make AuthKit. AuthKit is their generic component library to add sign-in, TUFA, all the different things you would need to do auth properly for your product. And it says powered by WorkOS. Obviously, it works great with WorkOS, but it could be used with other things as well. It's meant to be a generic component system for doing auth right. Really cool project. Pumped that they did this. That said, it was limited scope, and the work that the Radix team had cut out for them was completed relatively quick. And since then, a lot of those Radix maintainers have left to do different new things, including Base UI. Created by the creators of Radix Floating UI and Material UI coming together, Base UI is quickly becoming the new similar way of doing this. You'll see the syntax looks pretty familiar. It looks nearly identical, depending on the component, of course. This seems to be the direction a lot of things are moving in, but it's also yet another project starting from scratch from a company that needs to find a way to make money that isn't directly this. And it is being very well maintained. As we see here, 8 hours ago, we're still getting commits. We hop over to Insights, we can see there's a lot of code still coming into this library. It is still relatively new, kind of, but work really picked up in 2024, and now this project is moving. As you can see here, contributions are pretty steady, and if anything, going up a bit. December was wild. They shipped a lot then, apparently. Pretty cool. So what we've established so far, Radix was a really good solution for component-based headless UI management for our React applications. If you were building your own component library for your project or business or whatever, there's a very good chance Radix is the thing you picked. Your options would have been Radix, AriaKit. You could have went like built on top of the old Material UI. It would have been very rough though. React Aria's a really good one as well, but you would probably pick between one of these solutions, as well as a couple others that I'm certainly forgetting about right now, to build your component library on top of. React Aria is by Adobe, and it's very well maintained because Adobe makes it. AriaKit is really, really cool as well. Diego's working on it, if I recall, largely solo, like does the majority of the work himself. Even now, he is the most recent commit. If we look in contributors, yeah, this is Diego slaving over it. And RenovateBot seems to be doing pretty well too, but Diego's working his ass off to make AriaKit really, really good. But remember that the concern we have right now with Radix is that its maintainers aren't as involved anymore. The bus factor for something like AriaKit is pretty large because it's largely one dude. If Diego loses interest or gets hurt or sick or something, the project stops moving. And you can see here when he had dips, because I'm sure things were going on, he has more than reasonable reasons to have a couple months where he's just not contributing as much. That means the whole project slows in those times. So let's go take a look at the pulse for Radix. There were already a lot of dead areas, but now it seems to have pretty much stopped. Chance here, good friend and homie, very hard worker, has been pulled in at WorkOS largely to focus on helping maintain this because it needs the maintenance. But a lot of the OGs, like Benito and Jens, have fully stopped contributing, and poor Chance has had to come in and take over from there. Jens, by the way, is one of like the smartest humans I know. She's incredible. So yeah, scary. This is not a contributor chart that gives me a lot of faith in a project. I see why people would be concerned, especially when you see the 549 issues that are open and the 104 pull requests that are open too. Colm, who's the original creator of Radix, has had the following to say. It's cool to see so many of you recommending base UI in the thread. For what it's worth, I agree that Radix is a liability. Of all the headless UI libs, it's the last option I'd consider for any serious project, says the guy who co-created it. I think that says a lot. Seems like some amount he is burned by the acquisition from WorkOS. He feels betrayed some amount. Understandable. Watching your open source project go to a company and slowly lose maintenance and control, it's a bad feeling. I would understand why he'd be so upset. He's also said that he worked hard to make sure that base UI would be a relatively easy thing for people to migrate to. We designed base UI for an easy migration path from Radix. I'm not a fan of dunking on libraries either, especially ones I helped to create. What I care most about is helping companies to build UI effectively and ensuring accessibility on the web. So I'm happy to steer people in the right direction with those goals in mind. Let's timeline this a little to make it make a bit more sense. So Radix is created at modules to make it easier to build good component libraries. It becomes more and more popular and eventually becomes the most popular, largely because Shadcn adopts Radix in their example component library that is now what we know as Shadcn. Straight up, half or more of these AI app builder things are using Shadcn, which means in turn, they are using a lot of Radix. Shadcn is more than Radix. Some people would argue that Shad is just a Radix wrapper. I would argue it's not. If you look at the code from Shadcn, the components that you're installing, there isn't too much Radix in it. There is, there are Radix things touching a lot of the components, but it's like 8 lines of code, and they could almost certainly be replaced with something like base UI. So where do the problems come? Well, after this, WorkOS acquires the Radix team, which also came after modules ended. WorkOS acquires the Radix team to help with a lot of things. They both want to continue maintaining Radix because I'm sure they are using it, but they also want to have the Radix team work on things like AuthKit, which was the first major thing they built when they joined. And slowly, Radix folks leave WorkOS and with it, stop contributing. Remember, in parallel, more and more people are adopting Shadcn. That includes the company Axiom, which a bunch of my chatters and community folks work at, including Igor here, including Gabriel, who is one of the most helpful people in the whole community, and also including CJE, who started a lot of this. Here they are. Axiom was one of my first sponsors, and they're one of my favorite companies. They built a crazy platform for handling absurd amounts of data, ingest, and logging. Almost all of our I'd say not almost, literally all of our logs go through Axiom. They can handle terabytes of data for no money. It's kind of absurd. But in order to handle these absurd amounts of data, they have to make a UI that is performant enough to deal with millions of rows rendering. CJE actually gave a great talk about all the weird things you have to do in order to handle rendering millions of a thing in a browser. This is their playground where you can play around with things and you can see just the sheer amount of data that you can push through it with no issue. And the site flies. It's actually absurd how easy it is to hop into a stream that has 2.97 terabytes of data. This is all of the posts for Blue Sky, and you can scroll through it, add filters, and search, and it works. They have put a lot of work into rendering absurd amounts of data in a really performant UI at scales that are hard to comprehend. It's insane. Yeah, it's literally all of the events from the Blue Sky fire hose, and they just ingest it no problem, because that's what Axiom does. They're insane. So, of course, CJE is one of the leads on the front end side there, cares a lot about performance and optimizing every single edge they can in order to make it work well. They use Radix UI because they use Shadcn and also build their own stuff internally. I know that Igor has put a lot of time into building their own perfect component library, but they run into this issue a lot where there is an update depth being exceeded because the Radix library would call set state internally too aggressively on certain cases. The thing that's scary about this issue is that it was closed without being fixed early last year, and it is still a problem because they have use effects without dependency arrays. Like the biggest no, don't do this in React, they do. There's no dep array here, so this reruns constantly. And now you have effects triggering all of the time and things as simple as the popover package that they provide. That is terrifying. Running into this issue when you have 50 plus tooltips on the same page. Yeah. Not even the tooltips showing, just that the tooltips exist. Apparently for this particular issue, there is now a fix because again, Chance is finally working on it. Going to try and get this squeezed in before the next release. That is good to see. Thank you, Igor, for reporting this to them and getting it raised. Hopefully, going forward, this one, as well as others, will be fixed. These things are very common in Radix now at like the scales people are using it and shipping it at. Yeah, there's Ollie. Most of the Radix team's left, and Chance is the one who's maintaining now. Very least, that this issue should be reopened. Yeah, very big deal. Good call outs, Ollie. So more and more, CJE is seeing these things as they try to make the UI performant at Axiom and came out to blow the whistle on how absurd it is because a lot of people don't see this. There's a lot of people who are just going to start getting these errors in their React apps as they get bigger, have no idea why, and try to vibe code their way out of it and fail. Thankfully, Chance is awesome, as all of the Axiom guys are now saying. There's a good chance he can help at least stop the bleeding, at the very, very least. So now we have a rough timeline of how we got here, why it's so bad, and why the thing isn't being maintained as well. Thankfully, WorkOS is putting the money in to make sure someone as skilled as Chance, who's like one of the original like remix guys, one of the most legendary devs in the history of the React web world, one of the few who can actually fix these problems. Very thankful he's the one who's been pulled in to work on it, but it's still a liability. We should still be scared, and we should definitely take a look at what Shadcn himself had to say. We're at the point in the web dev cycle where we're talking about component libraries again. That's okay. With Radix receiving fewer updates, it's a conversation that's worth having. Love this open. Shadcn did kind of end the like constant wars about different style solutions and UI libraries. It was nice because I felt like I had to talk about that stuff a lot before, and Shadcn just kind of ended it, which was great. It's also worth noting that on some hand, Radix is kind of done in terms of like the features and things they intend to add. And that's a big part of why it's no longer being maintained as actively, because there aren't things that need to be added and done to it. There are maintenance things and lasting bugs that have been sitting there that should be addressed. But at some point, a piece of software needs to be considered done, or at the very least, like feature complete. Apparently, they're still adding new components. I did not know that. There's a lot of components left. Noted. These guys, who I trust more than my own takes, say that there needs to be new things. I trust them. And also Naman, the creator of Stylex, one of the other style CSS world gods, says that there needs to be a successor. All really good points. I'm thankful I have you guys here to keep me on point with this coverage. Back to Shad's take. Let me start with this, and I'll bold it. The worst thing you can do now for your production app is switch component libraries. Don't do it. That's not where your time or resources should go. Whatever bug you're seeing with Radix in your app, you'll likely run into more, including new ones, with something else. No shade to anyone, that's just how code works. I agree with all of this. You're always trading one set of bugs for another, but you also need a way to solve the bugs when you hit them. And if Radix's code isn't being maintained well enough to fix those, it's at the very least time for a fork of Radix or a solution for new things going forward to be built on top of. Shadcn says, yes, Radix is getting fewer updates, but it's still a mature and well-designed library, battle-tested and used in millions of production apps. Code doesn't stop working just because maintainers move on. Absolutely agree. That's the strength of open source, and what Radix does, it still does extremely well. So here's what he suggests. Already using Radix in production, stick with it. Starting a new project, consider Radix, React Aria, or AriaKit. All great choices. Using Radix and thinking about what's next, keep an eye on base UI. Parentheses, we are. I'm almost certain there's a near future where Shadcn starts to move things over to base UI. Not going to be fun because, again, remember, all the code lives in your repo, but they'll probably do a code mod or some fancy AI stuff to help you port it all over. Great comment from chat. UI library maintenance is a form of psychological torture. I couldn't agree harder. It's bad. As Shad says here, base UI is built by the same smart team that created Radix. They've done it once, now they can do it again, and it's looking really good. Also of note is that it is currently in beta. If your solution to Radix having a couple bugs in the very well established existing library is to move to a beta, like going from an established thing like Radix with a few bugs to a beta, if your goal is to avoid bugs, good luck. Also, if you hit a bug with Radix and you can't find a fix or patch, try testing the equivalent from base UI. The APIs are very similar. Because again, the code lives in your repo. If you install a Shadcn component, you can change it. We've done this a bunch. We made all of our Shadcn stuff super customized for our use cases in T3 chat. If we have these types of performance issues, we will absolutely start moving parts of our Shadcn usage over to use base UI instead of Radix. And as Shad says, Shadcn is built for this. It's code you own, code you can improve, rewrite, or replace. Most important thing, use something that works for you and that you understand. Your component library should be stable. This isn't where you want to take risks in your tech stack. Woof. Bars. I am so tired of people betting on super experimental stuff for things that don't need it. And your component library is absolutely one of those. A good component library is forgotten about once you set it up because it's doing what it needs to and you can move on. Makes sense. And the solution that Axiom has now, if you're curious, is they are git patching the dependencies. Painful, but checks out. Every new project, not just component libraries, goes through growing pains. Bugs, API changes, missing features, incomplete docs. It's okay to wait it out, especially for production apps. But where does Shadcn UI fit into all of this? Shadcn's unfortunately named, and it's also not a component library. It's an idea. It's a combination of a few things: an open abstraction, great defaults, and a distribution system. An open abstraction built on top of several component libraries. Radix is one of them. It's also by far the one that's used the most. It's code you'd write yourself, structured in a way that's easy to work with, and it's also loved by LLMs. Part 2 is the carefully chosen defaults. Things like focus states, animation styles, variants, components that fit within the system with one another as well. Just enough to be a good starting point and enough to get out of the way so when you're ready to build your own design system, you can build it on top. And the distribution system, which is one of the coolest parts, that you can call the Shadcn CLI and add a component and it will add the code to your code base. The component library is just one layer of Shadcn. If it ever comes to it, it is a swappable one. This is part of what makes Shadcn such a good bet. So to go back, the original post, using Shadcn/Radix is a liability. Kind of. For Radix, I could absolutely see the argument here. I'd even share it myself. Radix is not as well maintained as it should be, considering how prominent it is. I am thankful Chance is at WorkOS. It is getting things moving again, but it is still undetermined as to how far it will go. How long will Chance stay there? Because if Chance, again, bus factor, or decides to leave, what happens to Radix then? If this was a deep core part of another abstracted package, I'd be more concerned. But since Shadcn's whole thing is that you install the code and that it is a modular set of things, this works well. It's similar to why I made the T3 stack. The goal was that each of these pieces is modular and we can swap them out as new things make sense. Don't want tRPC? Swap it with ORPC, or swap it with server components, or swap it with just traditional REST API endpoints. Don't like Tailwind? I'm confused, but there's lots of other options there too. Don't like Prisma? You can use Drizzle. There's lots of different options for all the parts. That's why I built it that way. Each piece isn't part of the framework. Each piece is just that, a piece that's modular that you can swap two different things for. Shadcn is in a phenomenal position to swap these, both as part of the official libraries, but also as a script or a CLI that we can run to move things over to use Radix instead, because it's just code. The code is modular. You own it in your code base, and you can make these changes if you want to, and they can recommend these changes if they decide to. The reason Shadcn is even in this post is because the majority of new Radix usage is coming from people using Shadcn. Nobody's going and manually installing Radix and setting it up today. Some people probably are, but a very small percentage in comparison to the number of people who are using Shadcn through it instead. I think that covers everything here. Honestly, not that big of a shit show considering how significant the impact is here. I feel like the conversation that came out of this was actually really good, and it was a solid opportunity for us to all learn about how to think about UI libraries, how to maintain these big code bases, and how to make sure we do the right thing both for our dev teams and for our users. The future is still bright. Where the future will be is always hard to know, but I'm thankful we have such a good set of people maintaining these tools and solutions, and even if Radix has not been as well maintained for a bit now, that might change. It's looking like it is changing, and we have plenty of other options if it doesn't change going forward. I feel good about where the web is. I'm curious how y'all feel. Until next time, peace nerds.